With respect to the situation of the ousted alcalde of Conejo, Mr. Valentin Makin, the Toledo Alcalde Association on the 19th of April convened a meeting with the village. Actually, this meeting was called for by the second alcalde, and the alcalde association merely participated to witness the process and to engage with the community members on their concerns over the alcalde. At that meeting, the first alcalde, Mr. Valentin Makin, was there, so he was the one who opened the meeting. The central issue that was brought forward was suspicion by the community members that Mr. Makin had signed a consent document on their behalf for U.S. Capital to continue oil exploration. Mr. Kal at that meeting, as is customary, stood Mr. Makin in front of his community and asked the community to be witness to the response that he's going to give to the president. He was asked by the president if he had signed any document. He was asked 3 times, and 3 times Mr. Valentin Makin denied signing any document. So after that meeting, Mr. Kal, the president of the association, gave his word to the community that he will work very closely with Valentin Makin to give him support and to give him guidance to ensure that the will of the communities is being represented. In a subsequent meeting of April 22nd, another issue, or the same issue, came up again with respect to the signed document. At that time, Mr. Makin, Valentin Makin, did agree that he signed the document. Of course, the villagers were upset, and Mr. Alfonso Cal, again, in his capacity as president, moved towards finding ways to find an amicable solution to this matter. And at that meeting, 2 things were agreed upon. One was that Mr. Valentin Makin will work with the village chairman to put together a resolution that will be signed by his community members, where they will say that they were never consulted or were never a part of the process of arriving at making that decision to give their consent, as was signed by Mr. Makin. The second thing that was agreed upon was that Mr. Valentin Makin was to come to the Alcalde Association's office to see how they can work towards recovering the document that he signed so that it can be null and void, it can be nullified. Unfortunately, none of that happened. Mr. Valentin Makin had agreed to that because he explained to the committee that he made an error in judgment, that he didn't understand what he was signing, that he felt he was just signing because the company was doing well for them, but that he never had an intention of signing the consent of the community. So he didn't follow through with his promise to the community. And once that happened, then the second alcalde became more concerned again. So another meeting was called, an urgent meeting, and Mr. Valentin Makin was informed of that meeting. But as the president of the association told Mr. Makin in his letter, that even if Mr. Makin was not informed of the purpose of that meeting, he knew very well the situation, the fragile situation that he has found himself in with his community members. So it would have been in his interest to be at that meeting. And at that meeting, out of the 55 people that were present, 52 persons unanimously agreed to remove Mr. Makin, Mr. Valentin Makin, as their leader. Now, that is the customary practice of Maya communities. It had nothing to do with the TEA or with any other parties influencing the community to make that decision. We feel strongly that due process was given, but that Mr. Valentin Makin, is the only person to be blamed for the ultimate action that was taken by the community.
According to Mr. Makin, he said that he was never invited to any meeting. He was actually informed that he was removed by the community, which in his opinion was not the customary way of doing things.
Well, there are many things that are not the customary way of doing things. For instance, signing a document on behalf of your community without getting their consent. It's not customary way of doing things. Or going against or blatantly lying to your community, denying that you have signed and then admitting, is not a customary practice that's respected by community members. So I think that Mr. Makin clearly understands that when he was informed by the second alcalde that morning that there was going to be an emergency meeting of the community, because the second alcalde has that authority to convene the community to a community meeting. That's the customary practice of the communities, where your first alcalde is not upholding customary law. The second alcalde is obligated to ensure that that customary law is being held to the highest level of authority within the community. So that is what the second alcalde did, and he did inform the first alcalde, Mr. Makin, who at that time said he will not attend the meeting and he will not come to the meeting. I will also say for the record that we arrived early for that meeting. I was with Mr. Alfonso Cal, and Mr. Cal stopped at the house of Mr. Valentin Makin to inquire if he is going to come to the meeting, because Mr. Cal felt that it was important that Mr. Makin should have been there to defend himself. He was informed by family members of Mr. Valentin Makin that he will not attend that meeting, that in fact he was in Punta Gorda at U.S. Capital Energy's office. So I think that it is very clear for anybody to see where Mr. Makin found himself aligned with, and the community merely acted based on what they feel is an injustice against them.
According to Mr. Makin, he mentioned that he requested explanation from the Toledo Alcalde Association and a list of the names of who are those from his community members is saying that they want him to be removed. Has that been considered to him?
Mr. Makin, with the support of U.S. Capital Energy's attorney, wrote a letter to the president of the Toledo Alcalde Association raising several points. One of the points that he raised had to do with the authority of the association under the Alcalde's Jurisdiction Act to remove him. Where did that authority come from under the Jurisdiction Act? Another question that he raised had to do with the customary way of calling meetings. Was it consistent with what the customary way is? Another question that he raised had to do with the authority of the Attorney General in appointing alcaldes. The Toledo Alcalde Association have responded to Mr. Makin's questions in writing as well. It is also a public document, since Mr. Makin went ahead and publicized his letter to the Alcalde Association. And to this date, we have not heard anything else from Mr. Makin in writing, questioning the responses that he was given. But to summarize, it was very clear from the Toledo Alcalde Association that the jurisdiction, the Alcalde's jurisdiction bill, does not necessarily represent the extent of customary law and customary practices that governs the Alcalde system.
Since the removal of Mr. Makin in office, is he legally removed at this point in time?
Customary law is very clear. The Alcalde is not a body that belongs to the government of Belize. It does not belong to the state. The Alcalde is a traditional governance system that rests within the Maya communities. The only people who can elect and can remove an Alcalde are the people of that specific community. That has been the tradition for generations. For formality's sake, the Attorney General then appoints those alcaldes that have been already elected by their communities. I want to give an example, for instance, where an alcalde was appointed by government in Santa Elena a few years ago. The villagers said that is not our practice. And fortunately, the Attorney General agreed, and they withdrew the appointment that was made through the area representative at that time, and the village went ahead and elected their own alcalde through their own system of election, through their own process of election. So
I believe, according to the Alcalde's Act, the Attorney General must appoint the alcalde. Has Mr. Ofemio Makin, the newly elected alcalde, has he been appointed by the Attorney General as yet?
As I mentioned, the Jurisdiction Act requires that formality. As far as the Toledo Alcalde Association is concerned, Mr. Ofemio Makin is the only, or is the current alcalde of Conejo Village. And Conejo Village is the only authority where the decision of whether Mr. Makin, Ofemio Makin is the alcalde or not, that is where it rests at Conejo Village.
So, customary way, Mr. Ofemio Makin is recognized as the alcalde, but legally he is not the alcalde.
I don't know how I can explain to you the legally binding nature of indigenous people's form of governance, because indigenous people have rights to their own form of governance, and under international law it is recognized. It is recognized under the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So while the government of Belize might not to this date have recognized that in the Constitution of Belize, Conejo has the authority to sustain their own form of governance. So legally speaking, Mr. Ofemio Makin is the current alcalde of Conejo Village.
One last question. Is Mr. Makin, Valentin Makin, has submitted himself to turn over office to Mr. Ofemio Makin?
That is a matter that has to be dealt with the village. I think that the most essential aspect of being an alcalde is really the trust of the community. That is where your authority comes from. An alcalde is merely the eye, ears, voice of the community. So those are the tools and the equipments that are necessary for the alcalde to exercise his or her authorities. Now there might be documents, there might be files that are being required to be transferred. I think that Mr. Valentin Makin should do the right thing and comply with the expectation of the communities. Every alcalde that is removed is not the first alcalde to be removed during their tenure by their village. And I think the right thing to do would be to comply with the wishes of the majority of the community. Failure to do so, then the community reserves the right to make a decision on how to ensure that is complied with.